Okay. Here we go.
How are you guys doing in the back? Can y'all see this? Do I need to turn the lights off? No, I got thumbs up back there. Okay, I'm worried if I turn. If it gets bad, then let me know.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to start off talking about skeletal muscle and the nervous system. And I'm going to say something, and you all are probably going to chuckle at all of this and say, well, that's because Dr. Black is a muscle physiologist. But I present things in an order that I think makes the most sense. Okay. And skeletal muscle exists in your body for one reason. Okay. And that is to generate force. Okay. Its sole purpose is to generate force. By generating force, it allows us to walk and run and move and blink and type and scroll through TikTok, whatever it is. Okay. Without muscle, you can't move. Without muscle, you can't breathe. Your heart is a muscle. It's a cardiac muscle, but it works mostly like skeletal muscle, except the brain doesn't tell it when to contract. Okay. In that way, I think skeletal muscle is the most important tissue in your body. Okay. At least as it pertains to exercise. Everything else that we will talk about in class, every other organ and system and function and response is generally going to happen in an effort to support skeletal muscle being able to generate force. Okay? Metabolism provides the energy that the myosin needs to be able to break off of actin and continue generating force. Okay. Then the cardiovascular system provides oxygen and increases in blood flow and glucose and free fatty acids and things to the muscle so that it can metabolize those, provide the ATP for that. And the lungs, right? Everything to me comes back to skeletal muscle. So we're going to cover that part first. Okay, first. If you look in your textbook, this is not first. Okay. They do metabolism first. I think it makes conceptually more sense if we do this part first, and then you guys can understand the initiating events that drive all of the other responses later on. Okay. So what you see here is an MRI of my quad or my thigh. That's from my dissertation research. Looks like a piece of steak, right? Well, that's all steak is muscle. Okay. My thigh, and then here is an electron micrograph zoomed in on an individual myofiber. You can see these stripes, you can see where the sarcomeres are, and everything else. So we're going to talk about function occurs at the level of the whole muscle. But you move and you see your arm move, you see a whole muscle change shape. But all the things that are actually initiating that occur at a microscopic level, at a protein level. Okay. And we're going to go and kind of walk our way through that organization and then how those things fit together so that something happens with these proteins, then it causes this to happen at a myofibril, and then that happens at a fiber level, and then that happens at the whole muscle, and then that's what we see when you actually generate force and are able to move. Okay. Okay. So I think for the most part, I covered this kind of stuff. Okay. Muscle's function is force. They're these mindless force generating machines. Okay. Now, all of you right now are sitting down, right? Why are you sitting down? Why aren't you standing? If I told you to stand up. Everybody stand up. What did you do to get yourself to stand up? Okay, back down. Okay. I didn't tell you guys on Monday, when I asked a question, at some point, if nobody talks, we just do squats until somebody talks. Okay, so just prepare yourself. We'll have leg day someday. Okay. What had to happen? Did you think about, I gotta stand up, and then you stood up, right? So we don't really, this is kind of a strange thing to think about, but your brain sent a message to the muscles you need to allow you to stand up, and that's how you stood up, right? You thought about that, it was in there, you had cognition, and then you sent that signal. You're sitting down because you are not sending a signal to those muscles to stand up, okay? So one of the things that we use to do all of this are the brain and then specialized nerve cells in the spinal cord called motor neurons, okay? Motor neurons are kind of this halfway point of communication between the brain and the muscle. And so we're going to talk a whole lot next week about what do motor neurons look like, what does the nervous system that connects from the brain to skeletal muscle look like, and how and why can we change the function in those neurons to let us exercise better, okay? But what that does, using your brain, using cognition, it provides us something called voluntary control. And what that means is you get to choose, right? I say stand up, you all graciously stood up, okay? And then I said sit down, and you all sat back down. You made a choice. You choose when to have a muscle contract and not contract. Anybody ever had a muscle contract when you didn't want to? Okay, what does that look like? What might we call that? Cramp, right? No brain signal, but all the machinery in the muscle sends the signals, right? You get a disruption, you get action potential where you don't want, and the muscle contracts, and you can't make it stop. It sucks, okay? That's one of the things that makes skeletal muscle different than cardiac muscle and different than some of the smooth muscle that, say, lines your digestive system or is around your blood vessels and those things. We have voluntary control. And because we have voluntary control, we can train that voluntary control and get better at things and get stronger. So why are muscles and motor neurons so important? In standing up, you guys contracted, I don't know, 30, 40, 60 different muscles with exactly the right amount of force at precisely the right moment in time to allow you to stand up, right, and have that be a nice, smooth, coordinated movement. You want to walk, it's even more than that, okay? All of these muscles working in concert at exactly the right time. Voluntary control, precise control of force production. This is the way we're going to look at how the nervous system and the skeletal muscle system work together. This allows us to have all of these movements, okay? There's nothing better about understanding the development of this than being around a little kid who can't do things, okay? And you can see them like working things out about balancing and this muscle and that muscle and here and all of this, right? My daughter loves to do rock climbing. I built her a rock climbing wall in our backyard, I don't know, like for her 3rd birthday or something. But every time we go to see my parents in Northwest Arkansas, we have to go to this rock climbing gym because they have a bunch of stuff for little kids, and she clips herself into the thing and it scampers, 60 feet up in the air doing stuff. She's crazy. But she's a giant Viking baby for her age, and she's really strong and she's really good at climbing. And you can see her as she goes, like, I gotta be here, I gotta move this foot, I gotta pull, and kind of practicing these things out that we take for granted. We've already done this, and your brain innately just remembers those things. And so watching little kids learn how to walk and run and ride a bike and do all this different kind of stuff, it's just like you going to yoga and doing some new pose, okay? And you're like, this feels weird and awkward, am I doing this right? And then it gets better over time. But that's what the way our system is set up, it allows for all of that. Okay. This is probably a reasonable time for me to tell you guys, I've never had a class in anatomy. Sorry we make you all take anatomy. Okay. I've never had a class in anatomy, I'm doing okay. I've taught anatomy and physiology previously. It's mostly internal anatomy, systems anatomy, which is really just physiology in those ways. So we're going to go through and be like, there are 660 muscles in your body, and I know the name of about 10 of them. Okay? You'd be like, Dr. Black, what are the names of the hamstrings? I'm like, I don't know. What's this muscle out here is that abduction, AB, I don't know, one of those. There's adduction and abduction. There's something that's there. I don't know. I can Google it, I can figure it out, okay? I know the quads, because we do research on the quads, I know the plantar flexors, I know this is the bicep, and right, that's about all I know. That's about all I know. So choose that for whatever you want. But there are more than 650 muscles in the body, okay? You're not going to be responsible for knowing any of them in this particular class. If you know them, great and wonderful on all of that, okay? Does anybody know what a Russian nesting doll is? Anybody ever heard of a Russian nesting doll? Some of you are not even. Somebody tell me, what's that look like?
Dolls inside a doll.
A doll inside of a doll, inside of a doll, inside of a doll, right? They're these like wooden or kind of cardboard things. You pop them open, and there's an identical version. It's just smaller on the inside. And then you pop it open. There's another one, another one, another one. Okay, that's what skeletal muscle is. It's a Russian nesting doll, or it's a collection of tubes. Okay, whole muscle, big tube. You cut that open. There are smaller tubes called fascicles. Cut a fascicle open. There are even smaller tubes called fibers. Right? Cut a fiber open. Smaller tubes again. Myofibrils. Cut a myofibril open. There are these tubes that are sarcomeres, and then the sarcomeres are made up of these strands, basically of protein. Okay. And so, because we do all of this, we have this really fine microscopic structure in skeletal muscle that we'll go through in the next couple of slides. Okay? Things to know about muscles. A muscle cell is a muscle fiber. Okay? Is a fiber. You can see muscle fibers with the naked eye if you'll let me cut one of your muscles open. Okay? They're big enough. You can see them with the naked eye. They're a couple centimeters long. Okay? They are ginormous fucking cells. Because of that, because they're so big, right, they have to have many nuclei in them in order to be able to supply the correct amount of material that that fiber needs to be healthy. There's a reason that we do not see giant bacteria, right? Single-celled organisms are bounded by sort of the size of their nucleus to their surface area and volume ratio. With one nuclei, you can only get so big because you can't supply all the stuff you need to a cell that gets too big. Muscle fibers are unique, and they overcome that by having many, many nuclei. And it's a really important thing for understanding how and why fibers hypertrophy bigger and how they function in the way that they do. Okay? Muscle is mostly water. Muscle is mostly water. Okay. This has some fascinating consequences for people's appearance. You go to the gym, right? You work out, especially if you do some lighter weight, higher rep kind of stuff, and you go to failure, and you're just like, dude, look at my biceps, right? It's Wednesday. What are the bros doing on Wednesday? We doing arms today. Monday is bench day, right? We all bench on Monday, right? Thursday is like second chest day. We never do squats. If you do all of that, right? You lift, you drive water into your muscle fibers, they swell up and they look bigger. And then you're being in front of the mirror, you're posing, snapping some photos, right? Put on your Instagram reel. We know how all that goes. Okay. Conversely, you're going to be a bodybuilder, you're going to have a competition. We have you take salt pills and we increase sort of the osmolarity outside of the cells, and it pulls the water out. And your muscles sort of shrink down and you look like a football, right? You look real dry, and you can see all your veins and those kinds of things. So we can manipulate the amount of water in a muscle relatively easily because that's mostly what muscles are. 75% water, the other 20% is protein, primarily actin and myosin, okay? And so that's why people think you have to eat all that protein powder, but you really don't. On things is because of the protein, and then 5% is sodium, potassium, calcium, phosphate, some other ions and things. They're actually really, really important, but kind of as a proportion, they're a very, very small amount of what's going on inside of our muscles. Okay. Here is sort of micro to macro structure of our Russian nesting dolls of tubes. Okay, you start off with a whole muscle. A muscle is made up of fascicles. Fibers are made up of myofibrils, which are made up of sarcomeres, which are made up of these filaments that are actin and myosin, these thick and thin filaments for the actin and myosin proteins. Okay, all force generation, all of it, all of the action in a muscle occurs right here at the protein level. Okay, every time you move, what is happening is there are hundreds of millions of myosin proteins that interact with actin proteins, and they all move this tiny infinitesimal amount and generate this baby tiny amount of force, and we add them all together, and that's how you get, I can bench, whatever, 350 or something. Okay? That's where we end up. It all happens here. So something happens at the protein level, which then leads to movement of a sarcomere. And as the sarcomeres move, they make the myofibrils move, which make the fibers move and the fascicles move, and then the muscle eventually actually moves. Okay? And so we're going to spend most of our time today, that's left, and then on Friday, focused on basically from fiber or myofibril level down. And what are the important structures? What are the important ions? How do they fit together? How do they interact to allow us to generate this force that we need so badly? Okay. So the proteins cause the movement. Proteins generate the force, and they will pull on adjacent proteins. Okay. But we cannot get smooth transmission of force and smooth movements without some other tissue and other structures in skeletal muscle. And one of the most important ones, okay, is what we call connective tissue. And we have several layers of connective tissue, and then they're all going to come together and form kind of what we think of as this visible connective tissue. So, connective tissue, sometimes referred to as fascia, if you've ever heard that term, okay? Connective tissue is primarily made out of collagen. And we have what's called an epimysium, a paramysium, and an endomysium, okay? And so the epimysium surrounds the fascicles, okay? This is connective tissue that holds everything together. Then we have the paramysium, okay, which is down around our fibers, and then the endomysium around the myofibrils. They're all down in these increasing layers of connective tissue. And they just function like rubber bands. So if one part moves, it pulls its connective tissue, which pulls the connective tissue over here. And then it lets us eventually then pull everything. The connective tissue all comes together and makes tendons, ligaments. Okay. And so all of this stuff happens in my bicep. It eventually then pulls on the bicep tendon, which attaches down here on, I don't know, is it the radius? You all know one of those, right? Remember, no anatomy somewhere. And then force gets transmitted and it pulls my arm up like so. Okay. If we did not have that connective tissue, we would have way less efficient sort of transmission of force from one part of a muscle to another. Okay. And this becomes unbelievably important because when you need to generate some submaximal amount of force, I need to pick up this marker. I need to curl this marker, okay? You all will believe me if I tell you that I can probably curl quite a bit more than this marker, okay? Not a whole lot, but if muscles work on I turn on a little bit of the muscle, and it's only in certain places, and that little bit of force gets transmitted and it transmits across the entire muscle, which leads to movement. I don't get all of it all at once, okay? And so we have to have the connective tissue so we can do a portion of a muscle and still transmit the force without having to turn all the fibers on or all the proteins on at once. Because if not, right, what you get is every time I want to do a curl, it's just maximal all out. So it just does this. Right? Just throw things behind it. So that's why connective tissue is so important. Okay. So what we see here, okay, this is a cartoon representation where we zoom down in on a single muscle fiber. Okay, on a single fiber. We've cut that fiber open, and you can see inside of it here, these other tubes, those are myofibrils. Okay, but I want to mention some really key structures that occur on the level of the fiber. And without these structures, voluntary control of skeletal muscle does not happen, does not work. Okay, so the membrane, the cell membrane, remember fibers are cells. Cell membrane around the fiber is called the sarcolemma. Lots of muscle things are called sarco, that's Greek or Latin for muscle. I don't remember which one of those it is. It does not actually matter. Be like, Ty, Google that real quick. And do those kinds of things. Okay. Under the sarcolemma is something called the basement membrane. The basement membrane is a collection of proteins and other things that are there to form kind of like the framing in a house, or the scaffolding on which everything else kind of holds together. We know a whole lot more about the basement membrane now, but it's so far beyond kind of what we need to cover in class, and I'm just going to mention it very broadly. It's a thing, it exists, it's important. You guys heard of the disease called muscular dystrophy? Dystrophin is one of the proteins in the basement membrane. And if you have muscular dystrophy, your dystrophin doesn't fold correctly. And so the framing and the scaffolding in the cells is not as strong as it should be. And that's why you have muscular dystrophy. Okay. Now, if you look on here, these gold structures are called transverse tubules. Okay. Or a T tubule. A T tubule is a tunnel. It's a tunnel that leads from the outside of the muscle fiber down into the middle of the fiber, okay? And then when we get inside the fiber, it is connected or attached to something called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay? The purpose of the T tubule is to transmit an action potential. Okay? It is basically the same tissue as the sarcolemma, but it's like a tunnel, so an action potential is going to move along the sarcolemma. It comes to a T tubule and it goes down into that tunnel, and then it brings the action potential down into the inside of the fiber. We'll talk a whole lot more about that next week and how that works. T tubule connects to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is a storage trunk or a chest or a closet or whatever you want to call it for calcium. It is a network of sacs that have calcium in them that spreads out all around the inside of a muscle fiber. Okay. T tubule tells the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release that calcium. We need that calcium release to tell actin and myosin to bind together. So these structures and their ability to communicate with each other are really important for our ability to get a muscle to turn on and turn off when we want it to. Okay. I will tell you guys now, we'll get into it in probably about 6 weeks, that the ability of the transverse tubules to tell the sarcoplasmic reticulum when to release calcium is probably the single most common site of fatigue in your muscles. So when you're lifting weights or you're doing something and you're like, I can do a rep and now I can't do another one, I'm getting weaker, it's probably because the T tubule is unable to tell the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release enough calcium for the next rep that you do. Okay? And we'll get into, once we figure a little bit more about how that signal happens, we'll explain to you guys why that's the case, why that's a very common site, and is there something you can do about that to prevent it from happening. Okay. The green and yellow structures in there, those are mitochondria, right? Mitochondria make ATP. This is where aerobic metabolism happens. We turn glucose or free fatty acids with oxygen into water and ATP. And CO2, I guess. Can't forget about the CO2, right? You will note they are in very close proximity to the myofibrils that have the sarcomeres that have the actin and myosin. We need the ATP at the level of actin and myosin. So we want to have those mitochondria close in there so that they can, when they make the ATP, they can immediately get it off into where we need to be in that cell. Okay? On the outside in purple is something called a nucleus. You guys all know what the nucleus is. Does the nucleus seem to be in a weird spot? Okay? Nuclei normally in cells are kind of in the middle. In skeletal muscle, they're on the outside. Okay? You have a lot of them, but they're all on the outside. The reason they're on the outside is that frees up space to have more myofibrils, more mitochondria, more things that actually contribute to force production inside the cell. You're not wasting valuable inside the cell space with the nucleus. So they put them out on the outside. Okay. In the next slide, I'll show you guys a picture of what satellite cells look like. You guys heard of satellite cells at all? You guys know what a stem cell? You ever heard of a stem cell? I know it's Oklahoma, we gotta be careful, say things about stem cells, but stem cell, right? A cell that has the potential to become anything. Okay, it has the potential to become anything. Okay, in skeletal muscle, on the outside at various points, you have satellite cells, which are muscle-specific stem cells. They are cells that start to divide and develop, and then we stop them at one point in mitosis, and they're there and they're waiting. And then you go and you work out, and you damage the fibers a little bit, or you activate the satellite cells, and they make new myofibrils, they make new fibers that integrate themselves in, and they're really, really important for repair and helping muscles grow. Okay. They're muscle-specific stem cells. So we'll look at what those things are. Okay. Any questions about that?
Okay. Okay, we covered the basement membrane. Let me see what else. Make the top part go away. We've only been using Zoom for however many years, and I can't make this go away. What do I do? Ah! I don't know what's happening. I hate technology. Okay.
I want to mention one other thing here. It's an important term tonight. Where a T-tubule connects to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, that area is called a terminal cisternae. Cisternae is just like a cistern, it's like a hole, like a big kind of area where we would collect certain kinds of things. At the terminal cisternae, there's going to be some specific receptors and things that are going to communicate with each other. That are going to, the T-tubule tells the sarcoplasmic reticulum, here, now, release the calcium, stop releasing the calcium, that kind of thing. So we'll come back to that a little bit more so on Friday and next week. Okay. All right. So as those receptors go, what you guys see here in this picture, the top on the green, okay, that is the membrane. And in that white area on the top above the double layer of membrane, that's the inside of our T-tubule. Okay. So T-tubule, membrane of the T-tubule. So this area, all of this area down here is inside, right? That's going to be, we're going to get into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So there are two specific receptors that I want you guys to know. They're going to play a role at that terminal cisternae in helping us communicate. And they are what's called the dihydropyridine or DHP receptor, which is a receptor in the T-tubule. It's stuck at various points in the T-tubule, okay? It's at the top there in that kind of reddy orange, okay? And then there's a second receptor called the ryanodine receptor. The ryanodine receptor is the kind of more traditionally pointer, green little tubes that are right there. Ryanodine is in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay. When you want to contract a muscle, your brain says, hey, let's contract. Action potentials flow down your spinal cord to the motor neurons, down the axons. They get to the neuromuscular junction, you release acetylcholine, you get an action potential on your sarcolemma. It runs down into the T-tubule, and as that action potential reaches the DHP receptor, it's sensitive to voltage. And so action potential says, hey, DHP, reach across here and tell the ryanodine receptor that we want to release calcium. So DHP signals to ryanodine, and it causes the ryanodine receptor to change its shape, and it opens up, and then calcium can flow out, and then DHP shuts off, and the ryanodine closes back up again, and you stop releasing calcium, and then you can turn off your muscle contraction. Okay? And so those two are unbelievably important for our signaling steps. They're also the most common sites where we get fatigue. Okay? If I give you a lethal dose of caffeine, I can essentially make your ryanodine receptor stay open longer, and you can get more force production. Okay? If we pull muscle fibers out of your arm or your leg and put them under a microscope and we give them put a bunch of caffeine around it, we can make them contract more forcefully because we force open the ryanodine receptor. But this is like 50 Red Bulls of caffeine. It's a lethal amount of caffeine that we can give you guys. Okay, but there's some things that go on there that we will spend a reasonable amount of time talking about next week and in the future. Okay. One other thing on the sarcoplasmic, and we'll stop with this today. There's an enzyme that's also going to exist in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, and the name of the enzyme is the calcium ATPase, but we always, for whatever reason, refer to it as SERCA. Okay. Calcium ATPase. ATPase, the ACE means it's an enzyme, and the ATP portion means this enzyme breaks down ATP, so it uses energy. And what SERCA does, SERCA functions like a vacuum cleaner. And you release the calcium out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, you initiate a muscle contraction. As soon as the calcium gets out into that space, SERCA turns on and tries to vacuum all of it back up into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, and so ryanodine then closes, SERCA continues to pump stuff back in. You sort of get all that calcium back inside, and now we're ready for the next signal to come so that we can contract again, again, and again. Okay. There was a question earlier about fiber types. Okay. Different muscle fiber types have different speeds of their SERCA enzyme. And so if you're a fast switcher, one of the reasons you can go fast is because your SERCA is fast and it turns off a muscle contraction really fast, so you can then initiate the next contraction. So we will get into kind of how the function of all of these things fit together a little bit more next week. Okay, for Friday, by like 7 a.m. in the morning, you need to complete assignment number 2, turn it in on campus. Before you go, make sure that you leave your in-class assignment from the day with Todd. Okay? If you get it on your computer or on your tablet, then email it to us. Make sure you got everybody's names on it. All right. See you guys Friday. Down.